There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome to my very first books acquired in Canada in 2022 book haul. I did a remedial thing a few weeks ago and this is the first one, and it's now mid-August 2022 and I have been living in Saskatoon since the end of May. So I don't think I'm going to get them all covered in one book haul video, but I'm going to do my best because a lot of them are books I don't need to spend a lot of time on. So very much like the last quasi book haul video I made, which I put up in the form of books I brought in my suitcase from Tokyo video, I'm just going to quickly show you most of them, and then I'm going to sit down and look at some of the ones that are a little more unusual. Here we go. The first one was a gift from Joe Smith, everybody's favorite subscriber and commenter. And this is a work of short fiction from New Zealand, All to Blazes by Frank Sargeson, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He is one of the most famous writers from New Zealand that nobody outside New Zealand has ever heard of, I don't think. Certainly I had never. And I couldn't easily get a copy of this that just came out recently. And Joe Smith tracked it down for me and sent it to me as a present. I'll be talking about this one at some length later in this broadcast. Shortly after I got to Canada, Lindy, my dear friend Lindy, you all should be subscribed to her channel, Lindy's Magpie Reads, sent me a box of books because Lindy is one of those wonderfully strange readers who doesn't really need to hang on to books like the rest of us do. So she sent me a bunch of books that she had read, and she reads them taking as much care with her books as I do, so they all seem like brand new books that she read and enjoyed very much, I think all of them, and has passed them on to me, who will never ever part with them. This is a Canadian novel, Astra, by Cedar Bowers. I've talked about it on my channel before, and she read it and liked it. So I'm not going to say more than that about this one, but this is a 2022 novel. I've heard mixed reviews of it, but I know Lindy liked it. I hope I do too. She also sent me this collection of short stories by the Canadian trans writer, Western Canadian trans writer, Casey Plett, A Dream of a Woman. Also, I believe, a 2022 release. And I read her novel, Little Fish, for Pride Month and really loved it. And now I have the short story collection, and I know Lindy really liked it too. This is the new one by the Vietnamese Canadian writer who writes in French. Kim Thúy, I believe it's pronounced, Kim Thúy, and this is called M, translated from the French by Sheila Fischman. Now, I read her earlier book, it may have been her debut. She's based in Quebec. I think it was Rue that I read, and I didn't really care for it, actually. Found it a little bit too special, so I hope I get along better with this one. This translation is also 2022. And I'm so excited to have my own copy of Katherena Vermette's second novel, The Strangers. Look at that cover. Her debut novel, The Break, I absolutely loved. It's one of my favorite works of Canadian fiction. It's one of my favorite works of Indigenous fiction. And this is her follow-up, which I know Lindy really enjoyed. I couldn't get a copy to Japan for love nor money. And this is by a Canadian writer, Vancouver-based writer, Alix Ohlin, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. A collection of short stories, We Want What We Want. And I don't know anything about Alix Ohlin, just the name. So I will have to check this out. Thanks, Lindy. I believe those were all the books Lindy sent me. Although she sends me a batch like that once or twice a year. We exchange a lot of books. I got this at a thrift store. This is the memoir, childhood memoir by Canadian political leader Jagmeet Singh. He is the leader of the National Socialist Party in Canada, the NDP. And I really like him. I think he's pretty much an idiot politically, but a really hell of a nice guy. And I hear that this memoir is really well done. He is a Sikh Canadian. He's sexy as all get out. He's got a really sexy voice and built like a brick shithouse. And just an all-around nice guy. I probably shouldn't have disparaged his politics quite that much, but no, he's not very good at politics, I don't think. He should be doing something else, like writing more books. I remember when this memoir was published that Justin Trudeau tweeted that he had read it and very much liked it. So I don't know how genuine that was, but I'd like to think it was. Jagmeet Singh has been you know, he was elected the leader of the federal NDP party as a Sikh, which is great for Canada, but oh boy, all the racist assholes, which are growing in number because of Trump. Canada's infected by the virus that is Trump, and he's been abused racistly with increasing levels of threatening kind of violent vibes. It's really quite a worry. Quite a bit of Canadiana in this book haul. Peter Mansbridge was the national broadcaster, like PBS in America, NHK in Japan, BBC in Canada, CBC. Peter Mansbridge was the news anchor of the national broadcast for decades. And he still has a podcast. He's in his early to mid 70s, and he still has a really fabulous podcast that I listen to every day. And this is his most recent memoir, On the Record, about, you know, just stuff about having that job for all those years and all the famous people he met and this and that. Then I went to a book sale, a charity book sale in Saskatoon within the first week of getting here, and almost all of the rest of these books I got for like $2 a book or something. So here is a novel by Frank Sargeson, I Saw in My Dream. So I'll put that in the pile to talk a little bit more about Frank Sargeson. Alan Paton, Cry the Beloved Country. I didn't have a copy anymore. Having talked about this novel recently with Nell of Book Hunt, formerly of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, it made me want to reread it. A Colm Tóibín novel, Nora Webster, which I've heard really good things about. Quite nice hardcover copy. Here is a novel by a Trinidadian writer. I've only ever heard his name, Earl Lovelace, and this is called, interestingly, Is Just a Movie. It's not It Is Just a Movie, Is Just a Movie. Let's put that one aside and look at it a little more closely. This was actually not part of the book sale, but here's another one, one of the first books I bought. In fact, I think the first book I bought brand new full cover price for Nishga by Jordan Abel. I have a review of this. I read it as an ebook. I am so delighted to have paper copy of this gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous book. Not only gorgeous, but incredibly important. I'll put a link to my full review. I think you can get it online. That'll ship outside Canada. I think Ondaatje is one of the world's most overrated writers, and I actually thought after I bought this beautiful, like in brand new condition for $2, copy of one of his well-received books, Divisadero, I think this is one of the ones that I read, and it had one of the worst sentences I've ever read, and so I bailed on that page. I'm going to double check that, so I'll put that aside because I put that horrific sentence in my Goodreads bail review. Let's see if it was this one. Here is an Indian novel by a writer that I had never heard of, and just gorgeous hardcover. Intriguing title, The Sly Company of People Who Care by Rahul Bhattacharya. Let's put that one aside. I think this is my favorite Margaret Atwood novel, and this is a gorgeous hardcover. It's not true that all of these are from the book sale. I bought this at the used bookstore with a guy. The owner gave me a ride in the rain. Remember that story? And this is one of the ones I bought that day. I want to reread it, and I snatched up this gorgeous, it's probably a first edition. I don't care about first editions, but it's a gorgeous hardcover edition of my favorite Margaret Atwood novel. A modern classic that I have never read, Betty Smith's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I believe this is a Sri Lankan novel, The Match, by Romesh Gunesekera. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, I was drawn to it because I'd never heard of the title of the author. Let's look at that one a little more closely. This is a book, a memoir by a trans boxer. Either or both of Scott and Nell of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, Nell's Book Hunt, had a lot of good things to say about it, and I believe maybe Greg of Supposedly Fun too, so I have it. This is the first novel I ever read by Miriam Taves, A Complicated Kindness. I didn't care for it all that much at the time. I think I should reread it. 2 copies of one of my favorite short novellas, The Lost Garden by Helen Humphreys. These will be just giveaway copies or books I will give to friends. It's a lovely novel in which Virginia Woolf plays a fairly important part. Back when Helen Humphreys still wrote really good fiction. Some of you are going to groan when you see this, but this was a brand new condition. I paid $2 for it. Harper Lee's Go Set a Watchman. I might like to read it someday. A nice hardcover copy of Benediction by Kent Harif. Rhymes with Sheriff. Here is I think it's a collection of essays by my old English prof, David Carpenter. Courting Saskatchewan. Let's look at that one. The gay Indigenous playwright Thompson Highway. This is, I think, his only novel. I had the hardcover copy, sat on read on my shelf for years. Don't have it anymore. Here is a paperback copy. Kiss of the Fur Queen. It's very gay. What's in a Name? This is the story of the origin of every place name in Saskatchewan. Every little village, every city, and so on. My parents have a copy of this. I will tell you the origin story for my hometown, which is Plett, Saskatchewan, according to this book. Oh, no, I won't. It's very long. I'm surprised. This is a revised edition. It's much longer than... This almost has like a Wikipedia linked entries on each town. So Plett. The first buildings in the town were put up in 1910, and then when the railway came through, it was established. The village is supposed to have been given the name of Plett by one of the engineers who surveyed the railway line, because the only crops he saw after leaving Rosetown were in the Plett district. So plentiful, plenty. Isn't that fabulous? This is a blend of fact and fiction. Homeland Elegies, a novel. So it's kind of autofiction by Ayad Akhtar, an American Pakistani writer. I think we should have a look at this one too, because I have now decided that based on the number of books I want to talk about at some length, I'm just going to finish the top shelf, and the bottom shelf will be for another book haul later. I thought I could do it all in one, but I'm not going very fast. A prairie writer, she no longer lives in Saskatchewan, but she wrote a lot of her books set in Saskatchewan. She now lives in Alberta. Sharon Botala. This is a work of nature writing. The Perfection of the Morning, An Apprenticeship in Nature. My mom worships this book. I have never read it. Now I have a nice reading copy. One of my all-time favorite novels is A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mistry. And I had never owned a copy. I did it on an ebook with audio text combo. And so now I have my own copy. This is an anthology of writings by South African women, sometimes when it rains. It's a mixture of white and black and hopefully Indian South African women writers. Edited by Anna Oosthuizen, which is definitely an Afrikaner name. I read this novel, A Blade of Grass by Louis de Soto, 13 or so years ago. Louis de Soto is a South African Canadian novelist, now, according to the blurb, or at the time this was published, divides his time between Normandy and Toronto. Woo-hoo-hoo. And I really enjoyed this novel, A Blade of Grass. I think it was published in the early 2000s, and it's all about settlers and the people whose lands were taken from them. In this case, a white woman and a black woman in South Africa. Really well done, or so I thought at the time, and I didn't keep my copy, so now I have a nice hardcover. Finally, an anthology of Canadian Native literature in English, edited by Daniel David Moses and Terry Goldie. Oh, Terry Goldie, he was a prof of mine. I don't prefer not to even remember him. Anyway, probably he was a good anthologist. I won't say any more about this, but it looks, there's a whole chunk of reading here, and probably most of which I've never read before. All right, let me sit down with my glass of wine and let's talk about the stack that I'd like to look at some length. All right, the first one is this collection of short stories by Frank Sargeson, All to Blazes, by a publisher called The Common Breath. And I don't know if it's a reissue or what, I didn't look that deeply, but Frank Sargeson, who died in 1982, I think he was 81 years old, is touted on the back as one of the first authentically New Zealander writers. Let's obviously the white New Zealander writers, and he was also one of the first New Zealand writers. Do we say New Zealander writers or New Zealand writers? I think we say New Zealand writers. He was the first modernist writer in New Zealand. That's all I bothered to skim from the introduction or whatever, but here is the opening paragraph of the first story. The first story is called That Summer. It was a good farm job I had that winter, but I've always suffered from itchy feet, so I never thought I'd stick it for long. All the same, I stayed until the shearing, and I quit after we'd carted the wool out to the station, just a few bales at a time. It was just beginning December, and I had a good lot of chips saved up, so I thought I'd have a spell in town, which I hadn't had for a good long time, and maybe I'd strike a town job before my chips ran out. This is, you can tell by looking at it, including the price tag. Older book, his novel, I Saw in My Dream. And this is a reprint. It had been out of print for a quarter of a century. And this is 1974, the reprint, originally published in 1949. All I get from scanning the back cover is that the protagonist is combating a transplanted and decaying Puritanism in New Zealand. Hope there's not too many dreams in it. This is the Trinidadian novel, Is Just a Movie by Earl Lovelace. And what a title. Apparently this is set in the aftermath of the 1970 Black Power Rebellion in Trinidad, which I know nothing about. I'm familiar with the Black Power movement in the States. And in the aftermath of that, one character seeks to kind of get the group going and be its new leader, and then he gets mixed up with a calypso singer. And the two of them hope to make a movie together. Well, that sounds like a pretty interesting premise. Earl Lovelace, I think The Dragon Can't Dance is his most well-known one. Yes, I have checked, and this is the novel that I bailed on page 75, Michael Ondaatje's Divisadero. I thought the opening scenario was good, and then I encountered on page 75, let's see, is it the same page in this edition? No, it's not on the same page, but here I quoted it in my review from 2017, almost exactly tomorrow. August 16, 2017. I'm filming this on August 15, 2022, so almost exactly 5 years ago, and I bailed because of this sentence. All over the world there must be people like us, Anna had said then, wounded in some way by falling in love, seemingly the most natural of acts. My reaction hasn't changed in 5 years, so talk me down. If you really think I should give this book another try and just hold my nose over that one sentence because I thought the writing was quite nice up until then, but unforgivable that a sentence like that would make it into print. This Indian novel, The Sly Company of People Who Care, by Rahul Bhattacharya. He was born in 1979. This is his debut, except for he wrote a book about cricket touring called Pundits from Pakistan. And surprisingly enough, the protagonist here is a 26-year-old cricket journalist who quits his job in Bombay and goes to Guyana. So a lot of the story happens in Guyana, but then he travels even farther afield. Well, I was completely underwhelmed by the opening paragraph. I won't share it with you. So we'll give it a try at some point. I hope for better things from this Sri Lankan novel, The Match by Romesh Gunesekera. I love that cover. This one was published 2006. The protagonist of this one likes to play cricket. Set in 1971. He becomes obsessed, or he becomes very interested in a girl who arrives. None of his friends are interested in cricket, that's all we know. And then 3 decades later, he's in London with his own teenage son and goes to watch the visiting Sri Lankan cricket team play, and stuff happens. Well, that doesn't sound like a Sean book particularly, but I've read and enjoyed sports-themed novels if there was other stuff going on. Anybody have any thoughts on this book? This one I'm excited to get to. David Carpenter, he was my English prof back in the day as an undergrad, and also kind of worked with him in human rights type of stuff. Really fond of him. He has a new memoir coming out later this year or early next year, and I certainly plan to go to the reading or book launch and talk to him. But this one is from 1996, so not that many years after he was my prof, because he was my prof in the maybe about 1992. I wanted to read the first paragraph of the prologue because it made me 10 times more interested in reading this book, because he is reflecting on moving to Saskatoon. So let's listen to that. The prologue was entitled The Newspaper in the Street. When people ask how long I've been in Saskatoon, I say I returned here in 1975. That's not entirely true. Until 1975, I had never lived in Saskatoon, but I was conceived in a basement apartment in City Park, in a building still known as the Keewatin. My parents met, loved, and courted in Saskatoon, and I was conceived here. I am almost the last of my mother's family to live out his life here, a bit like a salmon that returns to its original feeder stream to begin the cycle all over again. I came to Saskatoon in the summer of 1975, so that doesn't really in any way mirror my story, but the fact that I have recently moved back to Saskatoon, the city of my birth, the city of my university, all of my undergrad university years, It still spoke to me, so. Courting Saskatchewan. And I should add that it seems like all of the essays are about how to reconnect or connect with Saskatchewan as a resident or as a repatriated resident. So yeah, it does sound like a book I need to get to fairly soon. And finally, I had this pegged. I thought this was the Canadian writer that won the Giller last year. What's his name? Omar something? But it's not. But what has this guy written? Ayad Akhtar. No, I think this is the only one of his that's gotten some buzz. And this does sound interesting. So it's part family drama, part social essay, part picaresque story. I mean, I'm not sure if that will end up working for me, but I think I've heard good things about it. And I wanted to read, if you can stomach the opening paragraph, because it's about Trump. I think it's still quite worth your time to have a listen. My father first met Donald Trump in the early 90s, when they were both in their mid-40s. My father, the elder by a year, and as each was coming out from under virtual financial ruin. Trump's unruly penchant for debt and his troubles with borrowed money were widely reported in the business pages of the time. By 1990, his namesake organization was collapsing under the burden of the loans he'd taken out to keep his casinos running, the Plaza Hotel open, and his airlines jets aloft. The money had come at a price. He'd been forced to guarantee a portion of it, leaving him personally liable for more than $800 million. In the summer of that year, a long Vanity Fair profile painted an alarming portrait not only of the man's finances, but also of his mental state. Separated from his wife, he'd decamped from the family triplex for a small apartment on a lower floor of Trump Tower. He was spending hours a day lying in bed staring up at the ceiling. He wouldn't leave the building, not for meetings, not for meals, subsisting on a diet of burgers and fries delivered from a local deli. Like his debt load, Trump's waistline ballooned. His hair grew long, curling at the ends, ungovernable. And it wasn't just his appearance. He'd gone uncharacteristically quiet. Ivana confided to friends she was worried. She'd never seen him like this, and she wasn't sure he was going to pull through. Well, that was actually really a disgusting trip down memory lane, so I'm going to ask you to indulge me just as a palate cleanser, because here's the comparison with the author's father, okay? Palate cleanser. My father, like Trump, binged on debt in the 80s and ended the decade uncertain about his financial future. A doctor, he'd transitioned into private practice from a career in academic cardiology just as the hostage crisis began. By the time Reagan was in office, he'd started to mint money, as he liked to put it. The playful attack of his Punjabi lilt always made it sound to me more like he was describing the flavor of all that new cash rather than the activity of making it. In 1983, with more money than he knew what to do with, Father took a weekend seminar in real estate investment at the Radisson Hotel in West Allis, Wisconsin. By Sunday night, he'd put in an offer on his first property, a listing one of the instructors had shared with the participants on a lunch break, a gas station in Baraboo, just blocks from the site where the Ringling brothers started their circus. Just what it was he needed with a gas station was the perfectly reasonable question my mother flatly posed when he announced the news to us later that week. To celebrate, he'd mixed a pitcher of Rue Afsa Lassi, the rose-flavored squash beverage was my mother's favorite. He shrugged in response to her question and held out a glass for her to take. She was in no mood for Lassie. Okay, so that second paragraph really redeems it. I thought the writing throughout was really good, but I'm assuming that other than perhaps more details about his father meeting Trump in chapter 1, we're not going to have to suffer through too much about that fascist espionage suspect. I'd like people who've read it or know a little bit more about it to weigh in, but I certainly liked the writing. And that is, I'm not going to call it part 1 of my book haul, but I'll continue with the bottom shelf in a few weeks. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching.